As I mentioned before at the start of the show, we have joining a guest. He is on video. I do believe we have him joining. This is Terry Schilling joining us. He is not in studio, obviously, but joining by video. I will quickly tell you, he is the executive director of an organization called the American Principles Project, APP. By way of quick background, he has a very political background working in communications, development, grassroots, and management positions with Representative Chris Smith, Republican of New Jersey, and Senator Sam Brownback, as well as others. So he has a political background. He is now the executive director of the American Principles Project. Hello and welcome, Terry.
Hey, thanks for having me, Debbie. Really happy to be here.
Well, happy you could join us. So I'm going to start by just asking you, can you tell our listeners, by the way, I'll tell you listeners, I just met this gentleman at a function in Texas 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it was obviously a conservative function full of room full of people very enthused about our country and America and patriotism and conservatism. So we had a great little introduction and followed up with him. I'm glad he's here. So would you tell us, please, Terry, what is the American Principles Project?
We are the premier political organization defending the family. So to put it in like really simple terms so everyone can, have an example, we're kind of like the NRA for the family. We get involved in direct elections and campaigns. We run campaign ads for the good guys and against the bad guys. And our number one goal is to make it easier to get married and have children, because the family has always been what makes America great. And the way that families go is the way that the country goes. And that's what our big thing is.
Great. I saw one, you have on your website several different descriptions of the organization and their mission. One that I really liked says, dedicated to putting human dignity at the heart of public policy. I like that little slogan, but okay. So I want to turn to and ask you to start with, there is an effort, obviously the American left has an effort to try to have the federal government in some way subsidize or provide paid family leave for every family when a woman has a child, and whether she and her husband want to stay home full time. The left always says, let's just have a new federal benefit, which is forced payment through taxpayers to the people to pay for family leave so parents can stay home with their babies when they have a new child. So the conservatives have been trying to come up with the left solution grows government, grows taxes, makes people responsible for other people's decisions. But the right has come up with different solutions too. I understand your organization is supporting the Paid Family Leave Act, which is a bill by Bill Cassidy of Louisiana and Kristen Sinema of Arizona. So why are you supporting the Cassidy bill? Can you tell our listeners what it would do?
Yeah. It's real simple. So we look at the country is facing record low birth rates and also record low marriage rates. And so we want to make it easier to get married and have kids. And what's happening with our generation is you have the husband graduates college with 80 grand worth of student loan debt. The wife graduates with the same amount. They both get married. They both get $160K, which is basically a mortgage. And they have to make payments on that. They're living hand to mouth. And the idea of taking time off of work to have a baby is keeping them from having kids. That's our theory. Now, there have been a lot of plans out there. What I really like about the Cassidy Sinema bill is that it's based in free market principles. It's completely paid for, and it doesn't grow government. Basically, what happens is after you have a child, you get a $5,000 advance of the child tax credit for that baby, and you can use it to take more time off of work. You can use it to help pay off medical bills. It's your money. And the pay for is that instead of $2,000 a year for your child tax credit, you'll get $1,500 for the next 10 years for that child. So it's free market. It doesn't grow government. It doesn't raise taxes. It doesn't create a new entitlement. And it doesn't put any more mandates on employers. And I thought it was a really creative solution. And I think it's pretty good.
Okay, for those of us not super savvy on all the terms you use, I want to make sure that we are following this. So right now, when President Trump signed his tax law in 2017, part of that was increasing the child tax credit from $1,000 to $2,000 per year. So that means a parent filing the federal income taxes gets a $2,000 tax credit for every kid every year. Right? Are you right?
Essentially, yeah, it's means tested. So, if you don't, it's a tax credit. So if you don't make enough money to pay taxes, you get less money. And if you make too much money, you start to get edged out of that.
Okay, but for the wide swath of middle income earners, $2,000 tax credit for each kid each year. Right?
That's correct.
Okay, so what you're saying, or what the Cassidy Cinema bill is saying, is that you could, as you were the parent and your tax payment, your taxes become due, you get that tax credit of $5,000 on your taxes that year. Is that right? So you go to file your federal income taxes and you get $5,000 as a credit instead of $2,000.
So this plan would work a little bit differently, and it would be an upfront advance that you'd get right after having the baby, and it would be in the form of a direct deposit that you get in your bank account right after having a baby. They're still working out the details on when and how to file that and get it all set up, but the essential idea is that you would get the $5,000 tax credit up front and pay for it on the back end over the next 10 years.
So you pay for that $5,000 by a reduction in what you're permitted as your tax credit for 10 years. That's how you're paying it back.
That's correct. So
okay.
Yeah, so instead of the $2,000 that you're supposed to get, you'd only get $1,500 for that kid every year.
Okay, and is there a limit in how many kids you can do this for? Like, could you do
I hope not. No, I'm just saying that because it's just a joke because I've got 5 kids, and but no, I there's no limit. Basically, if you have a kid every year, which I guess the biology and the biological reality is the one limit. But look, at the end of the day, our birth rate is at a record low. We've got 1.7 children per woman out there, and if it causes a little bit of a baby boom or an increase in that, I'm all for it.
Oh, I don't disagree at all. And I really was just trying to pin down the details of it. And we were communicating via email before today, and I had commented there was a proposal considered to be on the conservative side of the aisle that was about essentially you can borrow against your Social Security. This was another idea floated. Borrow against your Social Security as a form of getting money in now. So you have the child now and you can borrow against your Social Security. And then when you get to the age you would be eligible for Social Security, your ability to access your money would be pushed back in time, pushed later in time till you made up for the money you had borrowed. And I have to tell you my thought about that. I like this Cassie idea a lot. I think it's really good. Mm-hmm. My objection to some of the other ideas was I love your idea of incentivizing families and children. We didn't make it to 5 children, but we have 3. I love that you have 5.
That's pretty good.
But I don't want to have the government, I don't want to have, like the Social Security thing, what got me concerned about it was that people bearing children now are going to get to the age of Social Security, which is, unless it's massively changed, going to be gone or going to be out of money or your allotment's going to be much, much less. And I get concerned that people will say, okay, so I borrowed all that money against Social Security, but now here I am at retirement age, I can't afford to retire. You've got it. I mean, our government's going to respond to that kind of plea of, I need the money. I know I borrowed it, but I still need it. And so this really doesn't have this, what you proposed here, or you're backing here, is more of it just changes a tax credit. It's not something that someone can go back and say, they can't come back and say, I need more money now. It doesn't have that element to it, right?
Yeah, no, and that's what I really like about this one is that it's based in free market principles and it doesn't create a new entitlement. It's pretty straightforward. We all get $2,000 for every kid we have as a child tax credit, and this is just part of the same program essentially.
Yeah. Okay, I like that. I actually like that conservatives are trying to come up with responses, because the left otherwise has an easy argument about, well, look, we're the ones that care about moms, we care about babies, we care about children. This is why we're trying to give you a free benefit, and those mean Republicans or mean conservatives won't help out. And this is saying, no, we're just doing it in a way that actually allows you to be responsible for your own money and doesn't burden other taxpayers. Is that about right?
That's exactly right. And I actually, we hosted an event on paid family leave with Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Lee, and this was actually before the Cassidy bill was planned and introduced. But Senator Lee made a very interesting case for borrowing from Social Security, and he basically said that Americans put in about 12.5% of their income every year into Social Security. Now that's counting the employer contribution to Social Security. And the government basically says, all right, you have to wait 45 years before you can access any of your own money. Now, granted, no one has their own private Social Security account. That's just not how it works, and it's never really been how it worked. But what I really liked the idea of was it was almost like empowering Americans and individuals to access some of that money that they, my generation probably won't ever get.
Right.
But
Right.
On the other hand, on top of that, you're tying it to children and having more children. And so the idea would be that you be creating more children that will be helping the long-term sustainability of Social Security. That was how they justified it. Now, I am very aware of Social Security in politics and how it is a third rail, and I'm very skeptical of anything that tries to touch Social Security. But that was basic. I just wanted to make sure I was giving their logic and their reasoning for supporting that plan.
Oh yeah, and I do think I think that does make sense, and I think there's also in politics, I think on the right we tend to be so logical, so bullet pointed, so formulaic, and so we do propose many wonderful conservative policies, but there's a need sometimes to recognize what the left is always selling is everything should be free for you. It's the only reason you cannot afford to stay home with a child full time is because you really, because the mean rich Republicans won't help you out. So to show flexibility and support for families, I think is a legitimate political goal to attract people or to dampen the effect of the arguments of the left that the only way to help people is just a big fat new government handout program.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think that we're in a new era of politics. And this isn't when Ronald Reagan was president, where we as conservatives could advocate for just no government or less government in certain areas. I think that we have to argue for that, but we also have to have something to replace that government, because where we are right now, it's not where the family is and where religious institutions were in the 1980s. It's not where they are today. And so if we're going to be successful as Republicans and as conservatives, we can't just argue for less government. We have to argue for more family. And we need to get the government out of the way in all the ways that it's killing the family and killing religion. And that includes taking too much of our taxpayer dollars.
And on that note, it's a great segue to the next topic I want to go to with you. So Terry Schilling, you authored an article at the Daily Caller called American Renewal, Why Conservatives Need to Fight on Social Issues, and then in parenthesis, and in Kentucky. And I want to get to Kentucky in a moment. It's a great state of Kentucky. But I first want to ask about this, or comment on what you said, let you talk about a little bit. But there's a recognition on the conservative side that our culture seems to be overwhelmed. The American culture is overwhelmed with liberal left-wing ideas that seem to rule the day in Hollywood, in media, in academia, in general cultural life. The rules of political correctness that only enforce left-wing views, those are the views viewed as normal and healthy and right. And this is just kind of, we have on the Republican or conservative side just thrown our hands up many times and just said, we just have to surrender. I mean, we can't win. We can't win any of these arguments. So you first made the point, I want to ask you to elaborate on it a little bit, just about the idea that one place we can fight is in politics. Even you can't necessarily fight what academia and Hollywood say, but you can fight these issues, the conservative social issues, in politics. So can you speak to that point for a moment?
Yeah, and I want to say that I do think that we have to fight in other areas of culture. I think it's important that we have Professor Robbie George, for example, at Princeton, and Dr. Mark Regnerus at the Austin Institute at UT. But at the same time, I think that we need to spend more money and put more resources and time into politics, because it's the one area of our culture that has incredible opportunities for us to make gains and establish new institutions and renew old ones. So for the last several years, and you've probably heard this before, the common wisdom has always been something to the effect of, well, politics is downstream from culture, so let's focus on the culture and making the good arguments, and then the political battles and the political victories will follow from that. Well, that's not actually the whole story. I'd say that's probably about 50% of the story. So we believe that politics is one part of culture, and it's actually the part of culture where we make decisions about what our culture is. So the idea that conservatives have been abandoning this field of politics for the last several years, especially social conservatives, is kind of insane to us. And so what we're arguing in our entire reason for existence is to be that political organization defending the family, running campaign ads against politicians who are bad, and running campaign ads in support of politicians that are good. It's what drives us. And before I turn it back over to you, I think the most visual thing that to help spell this out and explain to people why politics is so important is politicians don't care about the white papers that are produced by typical conservative organizations. They don't care about the public polling. They don't care about any of the data or the research that is produced and put before them. What they do care about at the end of the day is their reelection. And that's what determines their voting behavior and whether or not they support our legislation or oppose it. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make the political case for all of our conservative policy positions regarding family. And I think it's going to be having a big impact in the next few years. I
love that realization. I've been involved in a variety of ways in politics a long time, and I think that is kind of a turning point for many people as you get involved in politics. You can love different think tanks, you can love the ideas they put forth and the white papers they write and the data they come up with and the surveys they come up with. And the kind of beginning step of being involved in politics is thinking, oh, so now that we know this, that the majority of Americans think X, all we have to do is go show this to Congressman so-and-so, Senator so-and-so. And as soon as he sees this, he'll be with us because he'll know that people are with him. And I think that is, as I say, a turning point or a step of growth for many people involved, recognizing the things that aren't going to impact their reelection. There are very few, I won't say there are no politicians, but very few politicians who get swayed by that. They may tell you they're swayed. They may have their chief of staff sit down and say, oh, that's so great, so glad to know. At the end of the day, they want to be reelected, and frankly, they need money. They cannot turn off their major donors. Yeah, and so you're to your point, which I thought this article was very thoughtful just on that point, but then you were going into the idea that you have to understand what issues will really get to the people, the moderates, the centrists, the kind of weak Democrat voters who might entertain the idea of voting for a Republican. And so you did a little study, a survey. This is, again, that same piece we were just talking about. You guys your organization, American Principles Project, did a survey, and it was a consumer research panel to assess the influence of social issues on Kentucky voters. And you honed in on what is it that the left stands for in this country that really could influence voters who are moderate, maybe moderate Democrats or centrists, to recognize that the left actually stands for these things and they're bad. What issues can you target that will really sway voters to come around to the conservative side? So do you want to, I could read your whole thing here, but what, can
Yeah.
you tell our listeners what it was that this is with respect to some of the transgender issues?
Yeah, so the really cool thing is it's called a consumer research panel. And it basically, instead of just polling where people are or what they support, what we do is we actually find out what changes their voting behavior. So, what makes them go from being a supporter of the Democrat to being a supporter of the Republican? And we tested several issues. And one of the most powerful issues that we identified in Kentucky is the issue of allowing boys to identify as girls and compete against women in sports. And the real insanity here is that, I mean, this is something that we all know is true, right? That men have a natural athletic advantage over women. It's just, our biology
Nature.
after, millennia. Yeah, exactly. It's just nature. We've got testosterone, and I think it's like 10% taller on average. We have 7% higher body weight. It's on average. I mean, it's really not fair. But this shifted the electorate around 8.5 points towards Governor Matt Bevin from our advertising that we've been doing. And there are other issues too that we should be directing things to, such as parental rights, allowing parents to make decisions for their children when it comes to medical decisions, and the right to know what their children are learning in public schools, and the right to not have secrets kept from them by their teachers and their counselors at school. Another issue that I was a little bit surprised about was the bathroom issue. So overall, the bathroom issue moved voters to the Republican side in the survey by about 3.5 points. I think it was 3.4 points. That was super low compared to the other issues. And I don't know what that's attributed to. It could be just the fact that people don't consider bathrooms to be that big of a deal. They might look at showers a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, we have been fighting this fight over sexual orientation and gender identity laws on our weakest grounds, on the grounds that move voters the least towards us. And what we're trying to do is shift this fight, shift our arguments and shift our focus to the Democrats' weakest grounds, where we can just annihilate them and eliminate all of their support from soft Democrats and independents.
I've often said if most American voters actually understood what the American left stands for in these issues, what they would tolerate, what they agree to, what they would defend, I truly think America would have a far more consistent, overwhelming shift toward conservatism for Republican voters. The left's positions on so many issues are so far afield from just basic common sense, basic common morality. One thing in your article you were talking about on this consumer research panel, identifying Democrats, the two most unpopular questions in terms of the Democrats' views. One was allowing boys to participate in girls' sports. The other one was refusing to support parental rights for parents skeptical of gender ideology. And then a 1-minute update for my listeners from yesterday's show. We talked about the case in Dallas involving a mom and dad, divorced, parents of twin sons. The mother wants to do gender transition for one of the two twin boys at age 7. She's pushing him to dress as a girl and give him a name as a girl. And there's a trial actually ongoing in Dallas yesterday. We talked about it in great detail. I want to tell you the jury came back yesterday. I'm going to talk about it more tomorrow, explain it in depth what the jury found. But the jury came back in favor of the mom, the one who wants to allow the child or assist the child in transitioning into being a girl, as opposed to coming down the side of the dad who is saying he's 7 for crying out loud and he loves being a boy. I'll give you more update tomorrow, but that jury did come back. My new lawyer friend in Dallas gave me a really long summary of what the jury actually found. It's very, very interesting. But going back to you, Terry Schilling of the American Principles Project. So if you have this kind of research, this kind of consumer panel, wouldn't this be a great thing to do on many issues for the Republicans, to try to figure out what pushes voters' buttons? It seems like it would be the most brilliant research of all we should be doing.
No, that's exactly right. And that's what we're trying to do here. So it's a little bit of twofold, right? We're trying to put our issues into politics and make a policy difference here on issues pertaining to the family. But at the same time, we're also breaking new grounds on political tactics and new mechanisms to identify voters and win elections. And so, I remember back in 2014, there was a big push, and there still is in Texas, to turn the state blue. And the Republicans wanted to stop that. And so you had a lot of organizations, and I'm not going to name names, but they were running ads towards Hispanics that were talking about El Quistono Pipelono, essentially, and how it was going to create a lot of jobs. Now, I haven't seen any of the polling on that, but we do know that there are a lot of other issues besides the Keystone Pipeline that would do a lot better with Hispanic voters, and family and operating businesses and pro-life. All of these issues, those can be used in a much more effective way. And if whenever I meet with a ton of donors, I meet with a ton of different other conservative organizations, and I encourage them to do these consumer research panels just so that they have a better idea of what issues are going to be more persuasive when it comes to voters. It's a really awesome technique. I recommend. The other cool thing that we haven't really talked about is that this technique allows us to identify hundreds of thousands of voters who are persuadable on this. So we do a consumer research panel with 2,500 people in it. We have all this consumer data in the background on these respondents, and we're able to make a model from the people that switch their vote and match that to the voter file. It is fascinating. And I know that when I'm running my ads in Kentucky, that it's only going to the top most persuadable people who care about my issue. I'm not wasting any money going to voters who don't care about myself, which happens all the time when you pay for broadcast advertisements.
Absolutely true. It's kind of conservative, grassroots, targeted to the audience and targeted messaging to the issue that is uniquely effective and persuasive. Is that about right?
That's exactly right. And if I was giving my credit where it's due, I have to give a lot of it to the Susan B. Anthony list, which is kind of like the NRA for the right to life in a lot of ways. But they started doing this tactic, and we kind of stole it from them because our president works for them as their top stratragist.
Yeah, so I'm sure they're cheering you on. Yeah, I know they're a great group. Okay, Terry Schilling, we're going to have to cut this off. I love talking with you. Sometime we'll come on, maybe when we get close to the Kentucky gubernatorial election. I think it's November 5th. And so talk about
in 2 weeks.
Yeah, in 2 weeks. Amazing. And actually, this Governor Bevin, very popular conservative, got a race on his hand. So I'll quick go with it. So tell me quickly, how are you trying to help Governor Bevin?
So we're running ads right now on protecting women's sports and highlighting the fact that Bevin's Democrat opponent supports legislation that would eliminate women's sports. We've identified over 400,000 people that are persuadable on it, and we're having a huge impact on with our ads. Around 8.5 points is what we're seeing right now. But we're in the final days, and we're kind of living hand to mouth, and we're raising the money as we go. We have 14 days left, and right now I've got funding for about the next 6 days. So I'm trying to fill in the gap and fund the last 8 days. So if anyone is out there listening, we could really use your help and support. If you go to extremeandybashir.com, you can find all the information in our ads, and there's a donate link and everything.
Great. And your organization, to close out for our listeners, is the American Principles Project, which you can find at AmericanPrinciplesProject.org. AmericanPrinciplesProject.org. Great organization. Terry Schilling, thanks for joining me.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Debbie. Really appreciate it.
Great to see you. Thank you. Okay, folks, I love it. I mean, people like that, just kind of on fire and doing work that he cares passionately about, and he's bringing the messaging about family and conservatism to the voters who can be swayed by it. It's a beautiful thing.